Since the first decade in the century, there's been a super hot topic. When gonna American leadership decline? And I believe it's been lasting for decades, especially after 2008 financial crisis, which America showed its structural weakness like huge national debt, worse public security, or competitive rivals rising. But we can't just simply conclude the moment of a quick decline just by these cases. So I think it's more important to find some key factors deciding when America could hugely possibly decline. And I believe the only evidence is to review the history, because no one can predict the future, which means history is the only resource we can base on. And in history, there were only 5 global superpowers that are able to project its power to other civilization areas. There are Mongolia, Spain, Netherland, Britain, and America. Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm your brother from another mother, Max, and today let's talk about this antiquated but hot question. When will American leadership decline? The global superpowers before America can be divided to 2 categories. The first category, consisting of the Mongols, Spain, and the Dutch, they only kept their superpower for around 1 century before experiencing rapid decline. British Empire lasted for 2 centuries, from the 7 Years' War in the 18th century to the World War II in the 20th century. The British Empire had the world's most luxury navy and the widest range of colonies. If we start counting from the establishment of navigation acts in the late 17th century, British superpower lasted for 2.5 centuries, making it the longest lasting world empire for the first time. And for the United States, if we start counting from the First World War, when its GDP surpassed Britain, it's been just over a century. But if we start counting from the Second World War, when American superpower went to its first peak, it's been around 80 years. Therefore, to predict the future trend of American superpower in 2023, the first question is whether American imperial model is more like the first 3 ones or the model of Britain. Then, here comes another question about the differences between the world empires in history. Why did the world empire of Mongols, Spain, and the Netherlands decline rapidly just after a century, while Britain was able to maintain for over 2 centuries? Okay, let's look at the common characteristics of the first 3 countries. The Mongol Empire was a land-based empire. Spain was a semi-land and sea-based country. And the Netherlands are the pure sea-based country. So they're quite different. However, when these 3 empires reached around 100 years of development, the reasons for their decline could be attributed to 2 common points. Huge military force led to financial collapse, and technological diffusion led to increased challenges from rivals. Then, let's look at what happened in history. Mongolia Empire, the first massive empire who discovered the jet lag within its own territory for the first time, did not have outstanding performance in its culture and economy, and its important force was mobile army of cavalry controlling the Eurasian grassland. In order to support the huge army, the first emperor of the Yuan dynasty, Kublai Khan, printed paper money in the first year of his reign to ease the financial pressure. By the time Kublai Khan was alive, there were obvious signs of excessive issuance of paper money, which had been devalued 5-fold at one time. An entire history of Yuan dynasty, which lasted only 100 years, and finally, its currency devalued several thousand times. This was a shocking number in ancient times when the metal coin was still the majority. Apart from excessive currency issuance, the main source of income for the Yuan dynasty came from 3 provinces in South China, which contributed over 75% of government's finance. When the Chinese natives rebelled against the Mongol Empire and occupied southern China, they disrupted the Mongols' tax system. As a result, the Yuan government could not afford to maintain a large military in East Asia, and its demise was inevitable. Now, let's turn to the issue of technological diffusion. Before the Mongol Empire, the biggest military problem in agriculture areas was the high cost of maintaining military, while the biggest issue in nomadic area was the lack of disciplined national organization and a cultural influence to transform the occupied territories. Genghis Khan canceled the traditional tribal system on the grasslands, reorganizing patriots into collective units. This made him to use discipline to control his army, while also enable him to recruit soldiers at a low cost, helping him establish the first world empire in history. However, after the conquered agricultural areas were destroyed by war, the cost of recruitment decreased, and the local were able to learn from Mongols' military experience and establish a disciplined and cost-effective army. With the cooperation of local people, they gradually began to challenge Mongols' ruling, like resurgence of China and Eastern European kingdoms. Ultimately, the Mongol Empire retreated back to the grasslands and returned to its previous tribal system. Spanish Empire, which was the first one to discover the New World, conquered the ancient civilizations of Americas and got access to gold and silver mines there. This gives Spain enough resource to compete for supremacy in Europe and establish colonies in Asia. As a result, Spain acquired territories in Europe, Asia, Americas, and Africa, and became a true global empire, making the 16th century belong to Spanish. However, the influence of gold and silver into Europe led to inflation, which eroded the purchasing power of these precious metals. In order to maintain their territories in Europe and Americas, Spain engaged wars everywhere, and soon the cost of the military surpassed the income from American resources, forcing the empire to borrow heavily to finance its war. In 1557, only 65 years after Columbus discovered America, and 25 years after the conquest of Inca Empire in South America, the Spanish Empire went bankrupt for the first time, and all debts had to be negotiated again. After that restructuring, Spain still had to fight to maintain its supremacy, and its finance continued to deteriorate, leading to bankruptcy every 30 years, which damaged the empire's credit and increased borrowing costs. After 8 financial bankruptcies, the Spanish Empire lost the leadership. On technological level, Spain's dominance was based on the Columbus' early establishment of the sea road to America, which gives Spain monopoly on resource development in most areas of the New World. With the development of navigation and maritime technology, other countries quickly followed suit and began to prosper in America. Gentle countries engaged in trade with the Spanish colonies and made away gold and silver, while rougher countries like England robbed the Spanish transport ships. In 1588, Spain angrily sent a visible armada to invade England and destroy the empire's main base, but lost to English navy and lost its chance to remain a world empire forever. Later, Netherland faced similar problems. After the decline of Spain, Netherland had the best sea maps and globes in the world, developed a shipbuilding industry, and excelled in building cost-effective long-distance merchant ships. In 1650, out of 20,000 merchant ships capable of long-distance travel in the world, 15,000 belonged to Dutch, with lower transportation costs than any other countries. At one point, Netherlands monopolized the Nordic trade, controlled shipping between the New and Old World, seized many important bases in the Indian Ocean, and profited from global oceanic trade. For this reason, the 17th century is known as the Dutch century. However, the Dutch Empire was somewhat strained due to its small homeland with only 2 million people. On average, more than 100 people had to support each sea vessel. Additionally, the various provinces within the Netherlands were not united and had serious internal conflicts. Therefore, during the peak of Dutch hegemony, issues with financial and technological diffusion were rapidly developing. In the 17th century, England and Netherlands fought 3 wars, with the Dutch winning 2 and losing 1. Looks like having an advantage. But because of the weaker national strength, when the Dutch won, they could not gain more spoils of war, and when they lost, they had to pay a higher price. There were consecutive victories. The Netherlands lost more and more colonists and trading shares. For example, in the Second Anglo-Dutch War, the Dutch fleet sailed up the Thames River and bombarded London. However, after the war, due to their inability to effectively control North American colonists, they ended up ceding New York to England. By the 18th century, the Netherlands could no longer hold leadership, with their domestic capital running away. Textile and navigation technologies had diffusion throughout Europe. When looking at the history of Mongolia, Spain, and the Netherlands together, some common themes of a world empire can be summarized. From a financial perspective, a world empire must maintain a very expansive standing army. In the early stages of the empire, the military constantly expanded outward and used the wealth of others to sustain their own army. As a result, the more they fought, the more they earned, eventually expanding the army to the point where it could no longer be supported by their finance. After 1 or 2 generations, the expansion reached the geographic border, and there was no longer so much wealth to plunder. However, in order to maintain control of territories, the size of military had to be maintained, and financial losses became the norm. Asian and modern global empires had a huge difference on technology, essentially due to the stagnation of basic production technology and agriculture age. Even a slight advantage in one direction, such as discovering a few hundred kilometers more on the sea map, would give the army a significant advantage. However, the stagnation of basic technology also means that leading empires can't continue to progress and also cannot maintain their lead over other countries in the long term. By the time the second generation of empire grown up, the people in the conquered area also began to learn from the advanced experience of the empire. However, they can still follow the imperial order. Another generation later, those who had seen the empire's early superpower had passed away. And the new generation did not naturally have the sense of awe for the imperial authority. They all wanted to challenge the empire's power with their force, and the empire's hegemony would gradually collapse. Therefore, Asian and modern world empires basically had about a century of national luck, and then they would quickly decline. Now let's look at whether Britain had similar problems. Britain's superpower began in the 18th century. To be precise, it began with the 7 Years' War in 1756. In this war, Prussia helped Britain hold back enemies on the European continent, allowing Britain to focus on its naval advantage, fight against the French fleet around the world, and seize colonies. After the war, Britain obtained the richest colony in India and the widest colony in Canada, becoming a world maritime empire. In decades after the 7 Years' War, the French Revolution broke out, and Napoleon came on the stage, who had a huge talent on the art of war. Britain had to contribute military funds to all European countries and unite against France with all its strength. At the same time, Britain assembled its fleet to prevent France from invading. In 1815, the British army directly went to Waterloo and defeated Napoleon, temporarily preserving world hegemony. However, if measured by the financial and the technological standards mentioned earlier, Britain was on the verge of decline at this time. Before Napoleonic Wars, Britain had already struggled to bear the cost of war and had huge taxes on its colonies to ease the financial crisis. As a result, the American colonies rebelled and it became the United States today. When Napoleonic Wars broke out, Britain did not impose huge taxes and only rely on borrowing to fight. 1815, British national debt reaches its highest level in the previous 2 centuries, with a total of £800 million, equivalent to 20 years of taxes revenue, or nearly 3 times the national GDP. At one point, 90% of British government revenue was used to pay off interest on national debt. By comparison, the current US national debt is less than 32 trillion US dollars, equivalent to 7 years of total tax revenue, and Britain's debt was 3 times bigger than Americans. Then we can look at the technological aspects, the material basis for Britain's victories in the 7 Years' War and the Napoleonic Wars were warships and guns that were beyond the world average level. However, both of the things were handmade products and did not significantly exceed the other civilizations. For example, back in the days, warships were powered by wind sails and made of wood and had not changed hugely in 200 years. As long as other countries did hard work, they could imitate similar warships. For example, in 1829, the Ottoman Empire built a Mammadia ship by Western technology, which had a tonnage and firepower surpassing all British ships. If Britain wanted to maintain its dominance with the traditional warships, it would definitely end up like the Mongols and retreated to their small island. As for the weapons, they were not all muzzle-loading guns and cannons, which were essentially iron pipes. Although Britain made them well and cast iron barrels were cheaper, they were not hugely different. When fighting against Britain, most countries could also produce firearms and artillery for shooting. Even if they could not win, they would not feel like British were in a different area. In 1807, the British fleet forcibly broke through the Dardanelles, and a bunch of bronze cannons from 300 years ago caused huge losses to the British fleet. In 1793, Ambassador Marconi visited China, and the Chinese feel like it was just a foreign country, but they did not have a sense of wow. These examples illustrate that the British Army at the time was still in a technological stagnation of the handicraft area, and its military advantage were not sufficient to ensure a stable naval hegemony, and even faced the danger of being caught up by other countries quickly. In order to maintain its leadership, British also followed the rules of agricultural area. They tried to strengthen their national strength and to limit the development of their opponents. The first method is to control resources. To build long-range sailing warships, large amounts of high-quality wood are needed, preferably from trees that had grown for hundreds of years, which are cut down and left to dry for decades before use. At this time, some agricultural civilizations often have exhausted their local forests and need to buy wood from foreign countries such as Britain and its biggest competitor, France, who both rely on wood from the cold regions along the Baltic Seas. One of the focus of the conflict between Napoleon and Britain was the struggles for the forest in northern Europe, with Sweden as the main target. Napoleon's subordinate, Bernardo, became the king of Sweden and turned to Britain, becoming the important reason for Napoleon's downfall. Later, Britain controlled Canada and competed for the ports in the Indian Ocean in the south. The military purpose was to obtain large-sized timber for shipbuilding in the cold regions and hardwood for critical components in the tropical regions. This forced the French to use lower-quality wood for shipbuilding and to construct a mast by joining several pieces of wood together, resulting in worse quality than British. The second method that gave Britain its continued dominance was to controlling more population. After suppressing other European countries with its navy, Britain sent a temporarily advantaged army to completely conquer India, the weakest military agricultural civilizations, and ruled over a population of 100 million. Britain collected lands and taxes and also export goods, while squeezing the expansion space of other civilizations in the southern oceans. Napoleon personally led the troops to attack Egypt with the goal of invading India. after feeling he could only watch Britain use its huge colonial resources to suppress France. From the perspective of a handicraft area, monopolizing most of the resources that are convenient for shipping by controlling a sufficient number of taxpayers can give an empire a longer life. However, aside from China, which was not interested in external affairs, there were two major countries in this world that did not care much about Britain's power: Russia and the United States. In terms of resources, these two countries both have vast inland territories and internal rivers that can solve transportation problems. As long as they slowly develop, resources will not be the huge problems like France and Australia. At least there are enough wood. As for population, Russia is on the outmost edge of Europe and has endless plains. The United States had the biggest temperate agriculture zone, and its population will eventually surpass British. Even for technology, these two countries belong to the European culture circle and have no obvious technology difference from Britain. So in the early 19th centuries, Russia has the world's largest musket troops, and the United States quickly caught up with Britain in ability to build long-range sailing ships. Many countries around the world realized that British hegemony was about to be replaced by the United States or Russia. Therefore, in Alexis de Tocqueville's book, The Old Regime and the French Revolution, published in 1835, Tocqueville put forward a viewpoint that the future world would belong to the United States or Russia, effectively indicating the next country that could potentially replace British dominance. From today's perspective, Tocqueville's prediction was partly correct. The result was accurate, but the timing was too early, 100 years too early. The time when the British Empire withdrew from the world should be counted from the independence of India and Pakistan in 1947, or even the Suez Crisis in 1956. This difference of more than 100 years is what set apart the British Empire from the previous empires like the Mongols, Spain, and the Netherlands. It represents the second century of British leadership. The reason for additional century of hegemony is clear, and it is the Industrial Revolution. In the late 19th century, around the time of Napoleonic Wars, British cottage industry underwent a transformation. It evolved from a slight lead over other countries in terms of quantity into a huge advantage of overwhelming dominance. By the time Napoleon was defeated, although Britain had a massive national debt, it also proposed the world's first coal and the steel industry. In the following decades, hand-operated textile mills were upgraded to steam-powered modern factories. Horse-drawn carriages were replaced by the railways. Sailing ships were changed to steamships. By 1850, Britain produced half of the world's steel and textiles, two-thirds of coal, and had a railway network extending over 10,000 kilometers. During the Industrial Revolution in Britain, other countries also made progress in handicrafts and agriculture. For example, Americans invented the clipper ship, which was the fastest long-distance wooden sailing ship ever created, and could cross the Atlantic in just over 10 days. Russia developed more land in Siberia and gained control over an increasing population. They armed a million serf troops with firearms. These achievements were noteworthy, but they were not significant compared to the Industrial Revolution in Britain. In the Crimean War of 1853, Russia found itself in a situation similar to China's 10 years ago. Battle at home field. However, the Russian Navy lacked a steam engine and the army lacked railways. Their 700,000 troops were defeated by a British-French coalition force of 500,000 coming from several thousand kilometers away. Russia had to abandon its plan for controlling the Black Sea. In the late 19th century, with a population of only 30 million people, Chile dared to adopt a tough stance in its foreign relations with the United States. The reason they could do that was because they had acquired several British cruisers for their navy. They even threatened to attack an American coast. So, looking back at the Latino American history, it is difficult to imagine that they would become the United States' backyard. And here, industrial technology is a key factor. Throughout the 19th century and even in the early 20th century, the strategies of the United States and Russia were not to directly challenge British hegemony, but rather to utilize their own resources for industrialization and accumulate enough strength to challenge the leadership in the future. In the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, China was a semi-closed agricultural country. It also felt the impact from Britain, and it could be said that China was the first country to experience a direct hit. In 1793, when Lord Macartney visited Emperor Qianlong, they were not given much attention. The reason was simple. They arrived by sailing ship and presented gifts such as handcrafted guns, globes, and clocks. These stuffs might have seemingly made the Chinese rulers interested, but they were merely interested, and these British did not differ hugely from the Europeans they had encountered before. At the time, Emperor Qianlong's favorite general Fukangen. He rejected an invitation for the British Guards to participate in military drills. This attitude was partly because of Chinese arrogance, but also included original judgment. A few years earlier, the Qing army had crossed the Himalaya and defeated Nepal's army there, which was armed with the British firearms, using matchlock guns. From Qianlong's perspective, Britain still relied on muzzle-loading firearms, cannons, and wooden sailing ships without any substantial technological differences from Nepal's army. After 46 years since the departure of Ambassador Macartney from China, the Opium War broke out. The British fleet first bombarded the city of Guangzhou, then advanced north and captured several coastal cities such as Xiamen in Fujian, Dinghai in Zhejiang, and Ningbo. The Qing government acknowledged that the British had a quick mobility advantage in the coastal areas, but senior officers regarded these harassments as small issues on the border, far from posing a threat to their own interests. Therefore, they did not consider the British fleet as a deadly problem. Until 1842, the Qing dynasty still viewed the war as a state of confrontation and refused to negotiate with Britain. In the summer of 1842, Britain abandoned all the coastal cities previously occupied. The fleet penetrated hundreds of kilometers deep into the interior along the Yangtze River, bombarded Zhenjiang, and even brought cannons to the surface of Yangtze River in Nanjing. This completely exceeding the Qing dynasty's expectation for the war. According to China's historical experience, heavy sailing ship fleets could not penetrate inland rivers because they will lose their mobility and only move slowly by rowing. Once the fleet stopped, hundreds of Chinese boats were swarmed and set it on fire, ending the war just like in the movie Pirates of the Caribbean. These ideas seem ridiculous. However, before the Opium War, China's previous fleets really defeated the Dutch gunboats with hundreds of fire attack ships. 200 years later, the Qing dynasty, seeing no big changes in Western gunboats, naturally thought of replicating their past success. British sailors during the Opium War recalled that when they were serving the Yangtze River Channel, the Qing army not only did obstacle, but even openly mocked them. However, no one realized that by 1840, Britain has already finished the first industrial revolution and could no longer use previous methods. Although the British Navy still primarily consisted of sailing ships, the fleet had over a dozen steamships. Even without any wind, steam engine could propel the entire fleet, giving them greater mobility than before. Therefore, the British fleet encountered no obstacles and captured the wealthiest southern region of China, as well as Zhenjiang City. Zhenjiang was the crossroads, where the Grand Canal crossed the Yangtze River. If it was lost, the capital and army in northern China would be deprived of the tax revenue and the food supply from South China. If Qing government didn't want to collapse due to financial crisis, the only choice was to negotiate. Therefore, as soon as the fleet invaded inland rivers of China, the Qing dynasty ceded territories and paid reparation, signing the Treaty of Nanjing to amid failure. The story of Opium War illustrates that China's loss was reasonable. It was the first comprehensive crashing from an industrial society, marking the beginning of the second century of British imperial hegemony. The British Empire, through leading the Industrial Revolution, successfully achieved the Renaissance. Today, many people look back on the history to learn about China's backwardness and agrarness, but forget that this war was more like a milestone of British re-establishing global leadership. Okay, back to the initial question. How long can American leadership last? The point at which the United States surpassed the United Kingdom in terms of GDP was 1900, which means it has been 123 years since then. The year when the United States and the United Kingdom stood on the equal footing in terms of naval power was 1922, with 101 years until now. The time when the United Kingdom looked for help from the United States in 1940 has been 83 years since then. Considering this significant event, American global hegemony has already lasted for 100 years. From the Mongol Empire to Spain and then to Netherland and the United Kingdom, world empires have faced similar challenges after dominating for a century, especially in terms of physical and technological advantages. The United States in 2023 is no exception, facing huge problems primarily in the form of physical issues like national debt, followed by technology diffusion, like the challenge from China. If the United States failed to address these two problems, its leadership could quickly diminish. However, the example of the United Kingdom proves that if an industrial revolution can be launched and the new rules of the game established, both key issues can be resolved, allowing imperial leadership to be maintained for another century. Therefore, the most important and perhaps the only significant question in current international politics is whether the United States can lead another industrial revolution. If the answer is affirmative, the United States is likely to remain an empire for 200 years, and we gotta continue to follow its leadership throughout the 21st century. If the answer is negative, the United States leadership is likely approaching its end, and China will become the new global hegemony very soon. Based on the current situation, there are many indications that the United States is launching a new industrial revolution. Examples include Elon Musk's affordable rockets and Starlink technology, as well as the general natural language AI like ChatGPT. The United States also leads its biochemical technology, chip development and production, breakthroughs in controlled nuclear energy, and a widespread adoption of electric vehicles. However, it remains to be seen whether the combination of these factors can disrupt previous technological and economic models, as the first industrial revolution did in the 19th centuries. Even without a definitive conclusion, this serious discussion we have is still meaningful. By analyzing the histories of all world empires, we can observe that there's only one main issue: if the United States can lead the next technological revolution. For example, like the Opium War in China in 1840, we can argue that the Chinese emperor banned drugs, which was more civilized than the actions of the British. We can also say that China used its trade advantage to accumulate a large amount of silver, while the British had to use the drugs to balance its trade deficit. In this sense, the Qing dynasty could be seen as a truly free trade nation. However, in the end, they were defeated by the British powerful fleet with the steamships. Similarly, when we talk about the United States today, many people criticize its innovation and wars, as well as its huge military expenditure, which undoubtedly is not a positive aspect. However, unfortunately, military power often serves as a driving force for many technologies. As for the vast amount of US national debt, it is indeed possible to cripple a country. As early as the late 18th century, economist Adam Smith expressed that concerns about the British national debt, believing that it could undermine the vitality of the entire society. However, in the decades after Adam Smith's death, the Industrial Revolution transformed the British economy, and accumulated debt for the previous era became a small issue. Therefore, if we want to predict the development of the international situation, we can only look at it from the perspective of Industrial Revolution, focusing on American private space exploration, AI technology, and electric vehicles. We need to objectively assess the technological strength of the United States and then consider the current industrial level and the future direction of your own country. I understand that many people are not very optimistic about the technological advancements in the United States in the past decade, especially in the media, because negative news attract more attention. They believe that Elon Musk's rockets, Starlink, and all these new things are just headlines, which had a greater effect than its actual impact, especially during the period of global economic crisis when some booster shots are needed to save a declining stock market, such as Tesla stocks. So I believe right now it's better to review some past predictions to verify whether many of these technologies are just hype. In the 1990s, there was a book called The Next 5 Years by Adrian Berry, a British author. The title of the first chapter of the book is Private Spacecraft. The author believed that private enterprise and reusable spacecraft were key elements that would change the future of humanity. Here is his prediction. Fortunately, privatization of space industry in the future will help solve these problems. Between the past Apollo program and the future privatization of space endeavors, it's like the night between two bright sunny days. Even more remarkable is the construction of the private spacecraft that will eventually replace space shuttles, sending people and cargo into Earth orbit and beyond. Because they are launched by private organizations, the cost will undoubtedly be significantly reduced compared to the current space plans. Adrian Berry wrote this book in 1995. At the time, the international miracle had just begun in the United States, and there were no signs of private rockets. The author passed away in 2016. I don't know if Elon Musk met him before, but they both made similar judgments about the future. So I believe that the new technologies in the United States right now are not just about saving the financial market or media headlines, but rather the result of decades of technological investment and accumulation there. I know that due to China's rapid rise in recent years, many people has the misconception that the United States is declining. However, no matter its technological innovation or the GDP growth in the past 20 years, the United States has outperformed many countries in this world. The bigger wealth gap due to aggressive wars or income distribution is another issue, and it's not just for America too. Therefore, to determine whether the United States is about to decline or has another glorious future of 100 years, we must consider the current technological innovations. Just because you don't like the world led by the United States doesn't mean denying reality that the United States could continue to lead the world. Even if this new revolution cannot comprehensively upgrade the world's economic and technological model, such as nuclear energy becoming the new king, it will still enable the United States to maintain a new advantage, similar to the international innovation of the 1990s. Of course, our focus on American issues is finally to discuss the development of other countries in this world and find their future positioning in the global economy. Now, I can make a basic judgment. By 2023, some developed countries like the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and Singapore have participated in the cutting-edge technologies such as chips and the internet. Meanwhile, they have become leaders in previous technological fields such as automobiles, energy, and shipbuilding. China has essentially caught up with the first two industrial revolutions and has become a leader in certain cutting-edge technologies like the internet, aerospace, and nuclear energy. These countries have the capability to stand on a similar level with the United States, and they are considering how to break through in the next industrial revolution. On the other hand, countries like Russia and India, which are developing countries, are still catching up with the technological achievements of the first two industrial revolutions and currently have no possibility of leadership in the latest technologies. Lastly, it's those small and poor countries struggling with primary industrialization or even a peaceful environment. We have to admit that the rise of East Asia or India is largely because of the fusion of technology from Europe and the United States. They stood in the positions that China or South Korea are in right now several decades ago, during the Cold War era, and at the time they could already consider how to enter the next industrial revolutions. In 2023, countries around the world are like cars waiting at the crossroads of the next industrial revolution, all eager to rush through when the next green line appears and enter a new stage. However, due to historical reasons and the technological advantages, the United States is at the front, closer to the intersection than any other countries, and more likely to be the first one to pass through the upcoming green light. So sometimes acknowledging the advantage of the United States or even recognizing the achievements does not mean surrounding. In early 19th century, the United States was already approaching the level of development in agriculture and textiles comparable to that of Britain. However, the British Industrial Revolution accelerated their progress, and it took the United States another 100 years to catch up. But the Americans live in the shadow of Britain for those 100 years. We're not constantly thinking about how to prove that Britain was about to fail, nor just openly declare that the United States can disregard British steamships and defeat the advanced coal and steel industries with their slave-based cotton textile industry. In reality, the United States learned a lot from Britain's experience in the Industrial Revolution, absorbed British technology and capital, and combined it with their own characteristics to achieve greater effects. For example, when Britain built railways, the United States capitalized on its advantage as a continental nation and used British capital to construct a transcontinental railway. While Britain made steam fleets, the United States, without immediate qualifications for oceanic dominance, focused on the steamboat transportation on the Mississippi River. As Britain monopolized the critical streams around the world, the United States began digging canals in its own 5 Great Lakes, creating convenient shipping routes for New York Harbor and Chicago. After generations of efforts, in the early 20th century, the United States surpassed Britain in GDP. Thomas Edison built the world's first electric ray, and the Wright brothers conducted the earliest experiments of airplanes. The United States could proudly declare itself as one of the leaders in technological innovation, and at that point, they can't overlook Britain's power. Today, the world is no different. No matter the European Union or the technology giants like China, there's still a noticeable gap between their technology and Americans, and other countries have even bigger one. We don't need to search for evidence every day or use specific cases like healthcare or gun control issues in the United States to declare that this evil country will soon decline. Also, we don't need to use our country's previous GDP growth or the economic achievements obtained through the observing American technology to prove that the future will undoubtedly be optimistic. History has shown that more than one country has returned to a low-growth state due to the failure of previous industrial upgrades, such as South America and Russia. Therefore, what you need to do is to assess your country's technological level and then think about how to develop new industries and technologies. No matter learning from others or creating new technologies, that's the only way you can generate new economic growth. Finally, to be honest, this also made the future full of challenges and a sense of novelty, because I believe many countries have the opportunity to create new miracles in this century, and your country is very likely to be one of them. Thank you guys for watching, and hopefully subscribe, ring the bell, and leave some comments if you like. See you next time.